Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another fantasy video. This time we have Week 7's running backs stardom sit-em. Let's get to it. Now first we have the Thursday night football matchup between the Saints and the Jaguars. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start Travis Etienne. The Saints do allow the second least points per game to running backs with just under 14, and they have not allowed a single touchdown to running backs. However, Travis Etienne is currently the number 3 fantasy running back, and he has 4 weeks of RB10 or better. He's locked in at RB1 because he has such a high volume amount in his offense. He can't be afforded to sat even if you could really sit him because of that. The same goes for Alvin Kamara. The Jaguars do allow the 12th least points per game to running backs, but Kamara's been RB10 or better every week that he's played so far, and he scored 17 points or more in all of those games. He has 23 receptions over the last 3 weeks, and he's locked in because of his volume the same way that Etienne is. Next up, we have the Ravens versus the Lions, and we're going to sit Jahmyr Gibb. The Ravens do allow 18.8 points per game to running backs, but David Montgomery is out, and Gibbs is dealing with an injury on his own. Gibbs also doesn't really receive a lot of touches, even when Montgomery is not playing. For some reason, he's just not involved as heavily as many people expected him to be in this offense, and he shouldn't be started until that volume increases. As for the Ravens running backs, the Lions allow the least points per game to running backs in the entire league, with just under 12. They only allow 64.7 rush yards per game, which is the least in the NFL as well. And the backfield here is splitting a lot of carries. So Justice Hill and Gus Edwards are splitting that time, and they don't really have one main running back. Up next is the Bears versus the Raiders, and we're going to start Josh Jacobs. The Bears allow the 5th most points per game to running backs with 27.5. Jacobs is currently number 11 running back in fantasy. He has a lot of volume in his offense, and especially will have some because of how poor the Bears defense is. This week he has an RB2 floor with a high-end RB1 ceiling. I really think he could be the first running back in this week for fantasy if all goes well. As for the Bears running backs, the Raiders allow 22.9 points per game to running back, but the Bears backfield is dealing with injuries. You don't really know who's going to suit up, and with Fields dealing with injury, it's just uncertainty all around in the offense. You don't know really what's going to happen with their game plan, so it's just best to avoid them. Up next, we have the Colts versus the Browns, and we're going to start Jerome Ford. The Colts allow the 10th most points per game to running back. With Watson potentially returning, Colts should stack the box less, and that opens up running lanes for Ford. And you can see that by the 2 weeks where he played and started with Watson at quarterback, where he was RB6 and 7. If Watson doesn't play, then it gets a little iffy, and I don't know if I would start Ford. But with the assumption Watson is going to play, I'm going to start him. As for Zach Moss, in 2 consecutive weeks with Taylor back, Moss has scored 33 and 17 points. He's providing fantasy use even though Taylor's taking away carries from him, and until he proves otherwise, I'm okay with starting him as a solid flex play. Jonathan Taylor, on the other hand, I'm going to sit. The Browns allow the 7th least points per game to running backs with 16.08. He's still receiving less than 50% snap count, and he has a tough matchup against the NFL's best defense, and he's being outperformed by Zach Moss, so there's no reason to start him here. Up next, we have the divisional matchup between the Bills and the Patriots here, and I'm going to go ahead and sit both of these guys. For Ramondre Stevenson, the Bills do allow the 12th most points per game to running backs, and he's coming off an RB6 18-point game, but he's had no more than 7 points in each of the previous 3 weeks. He's struggling to prove he can be consistent, and he's not start-worthy because of that. As for James Cook, I don't know what's going on with the Bills. He was great on the ground. He had 71 rushing yards on like 10 carries or something like that. And he just played great, but it seems like he's grabbing less of a role week after week. And he's gone back-to-back weeks with 7 points or less. I just don't understand what the Bills are doing with him, and that's why he needs to be sat. Another divisional matchup on our hands between the Giants and the Commanders. We're going to start Saquon Barkley. Washington does allow the 13th least points per game to running backs with about 18.5. But Barkley is this offense. He had 28 touches versus the Bills last week, and he remains receiving his unusually large workload for this offense. Even coming off of an injury, you would expect him to get limited or something, but that just didn't happen. He is this offense, and he should be started. As for Brian Robinson, the Giants allow the 8th most points per game to running backs with 24. but he struggled on the ground recently, and there's reason to bench him. He has no more than 45 yards in the last 3 weeks, and he seems very touchdown reliant. So because of that, you need to sit him. I can't trust that he's going to get a touchdown each and every game and become that fantasy reliable player. The Buccaneers and the Falcons are up next, and we're going to start Bijan Robinson. The Bucs allow the 10th least points per game to running backs. However, Bijan is heavily involved in the Falcons' offense. He has at least 10 touches in every game this year. He's struggling to find his footing in the run game, but he is making a point in the passing game to be that focal part of that offense. And because of that, he's the number 8 fantasy running back. In PPR formats, he is killing it, and he should be started. As for Rachaad White, the Falcons allow the 3rd least points per game to running backs with 14.22, and Rachaad White is number 24 running back in fantasy. He only has 1 game above 11 points this season, and yet, for some reason, they keep projecting him to grab 12, 13 points, and I don't know why. He only has 232 yards in these 5 games that he's played with 3.31 yards per carry. It's just not smart to start him, and I would avoid him at all costs. Next up, we have the Seahawks versus the Cardinals in an NFC West matchup, and we're going to start Kenneth Walker. The Cardinals allow the 3rd most points per game to running backs with 28. He's the number 10 fantasy running back. He's getting consistent and steady work as an option for Seattle's offense, who have been struggling, by the way. He has a touchdown in each of the last 4 weeks. He's easily a high-end running back 1 option this week. He should be started. As for the Cardinals running backs, there isn't really much to say except they're pretty much splitting carries with James Conner out. Everybody thought that Emari DeMercado would get a majority of the workload, but he just didn't, and they gave it to Keontae Ingram. So nobody's really consistently getting enough work to warrant starting here, and Cardinals running backs should just be avoided. Up next, we have the Rams versus the Steelers, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to sit Zach Evans. The Steelers allow the 11th most points per game to running backs, but Evans is currently the only running back on this roster, so I don't really know what's going to happen. As of this recording, he is that only person. With the Rams on their 3rd string running back, they could lean on the pass more because of their limitations, and his ceiling is low because of that. I can't start him because of how low that ceiling is. As for Najee Harris, this guy is struggling. The Rams allow the 8th least points per game to running backs with a little over 16, and Najee's being outworked by Jaylen Warren, who's his backup. He has no weekly finishes better than RB19, and he should be more involved in this passing game and in this offense as a whole, but he's just not, and I'm not sure why. Next up, we have the Broncos versus the Packers, and I'm going to start Aaron Jones, assuming that he plays. If he does play, the Broncos do allow the most points per game to running backs with over 39. He's dealing with injury, but when he plays, the volume is there. It literally will not get any better than this for him, and if he doesn't play, A.J. Dillon should be a great start as well. As for Javonte Williams, we're going to go ahead and sit him. The Packers do allow the 4th most points per game to running backs with 27.7, but he's completely uninvolved in the passing game. He's finished as RB27 or worse every week this season, and he's currently RB39 in fantasy. He's splitting the backfield now with McLaughlin and Pirine, and it's just not smart to start him at all. The Chiefs and the Chargers are up next, and we're going to start both of these guys once again. Isaiah Pacheco, he's facing a really good matchup here. The Chargers allow the 7th most points per game to running backs with 24.4. He's currently the number 13 fantasy running back, and he has 4 straight running back 15 or better finishes. The only thing that's really holding him back here is he's always had RB1 upside, but he shares downs with McKinnon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. As for Austin Eckler, the Chiefs allow the 6th least points per game to running backs, but he's still an elite fantasy option despite averaging 1.9 yards per carry versus Dallas last week. He's a focal point in this offense. He's a mainstay. He should be started. There's no questioning it. Sunday Night Football between the Eagles and the Dolphins is up next, and this one is going to be a little controversial. I'm going to go ahead and start DeAndre Swift because the Dolphins do allow 20.6 points per game to running backs. He's the number 7 fantasy running back, and when he lacks his running game versus tough defense where he can't get those yards, he makes up for it in his passing game and being able to catch. He's the RB15 or better in every week since he's become the starter, and I don't see a reason to sit him now. As for Raheem Mostert, this one is the controversial one. I'm going to sit him because the Eagles allow the fourth least points per game to running back with 14.7, they also allow the second least total rushing yards in the NFL with only 302. He is currently the number 2 fantasy running back, but he has a tough matchup. It should force the Dolphins to lean on the pass, which the Eagles are more susceptible to, and I don't see Raheem Mostert producing at as high of a volume as he has the last couple of times. And last but not least, we have the Monday Night Football game between the Vikings and the 49ers. We're going to go ahead and start Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, he's the number 1 fantasy running back. He has no finishes worse than RB15, even when he missed half of the game, the last game. The Vikings do allow the 5th least points per game to running back. However, if he doesn't play because of injury, I would sit the 49ers running back, Jordan Mason. I wouldn't start him. As for Alexander Mattison, I'm definitely going to say the 49ers allow the 14th least points per game to running backs with 18.5, just a little bit above that. He is receiving an uptick in touches, especially in the passing game, but he only has one finish of RB17 or better, and that's what's really keeping me away from him. I think that the 49ers bounce back here, and they really hold Madison down. And that's going to do it for this week's Stardom Sit-em Running Back Edition. If you guys like this video and want to see more like it, make sure you smash that subscribe button, like, comment, do anything that you want to do. Just make sure you stick around, and I will catch you guys in the next episode. Peace.